Welcome everybody, wherever you are watching through Politico in Iowa, across our country, across the world, thanks to the world of technology. Welcome to this conversation about what's happening in the world of wind energy in the past, right now, and where this industry is headed. We have some of the leading minds in our area to weigh in on this conversation. I'm Dave Price, the political director from WHO TV in Des Moines, Iowa. And I have a cheat sheet because some of these people have really long titles, and I don't want to screw up any of these things. Let's start with Jeff. Jeff Danielson's the Central Regional Director for the American Wind Energy Association. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here, Dave. Thank you.
Then we go to Carrie Johansson. She's the Energy Program Director for the Iowa Environmental Council. Hello.
Good morning.
Dan Lutet is the Director of this is the real long title. The Director of Sustainable Energy Resources and Technologies and Director of Governmental Affairs and Information at Iowa Lakes Community College.
Thanks for having us, Dave.
That's tough to get on a business card.
You can abbreviate it.
Brian's next. Brian Selinger, the team leader from the Iowa Energy Office from the Iowa Economic Development Authority. Hello.
Hello.
Then we have Chaz Allen with a short title, Executive Director for Iowa Utility Association. Hello. And flanking us on the end is Bill. Bill Menner is the Executive Director of the Iowa Rural Development Council and the former Iowa State Director of the USDA Rural Development. Hello, everybody.
Hey.
All right, let's talk about a lot of things here today. Jeff, maybe let's talk to you. We have two former state legislators on this panel right now, too. As you look broadly, where do you see Iowa's place in the future of wind energy as it relates to the needs of the whole country?
So a very important role, not only because of the track record of success, very high percentage of wind and renewable energy on our grid already, 35% roughly. But going forward, there's no reason that can't double here in Iowa. And then in my role as Midwest Director for another 11 states, they all are trying to achieve the same type of goals. Kansas, for example, and North Dakota, other states. So we have an opportunity to take the lessons learned from Iowa, to export them, if you will, politically and policy-wise to those other states. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be drawn from Iowa's success.
All right, you're looking nationally, so you can't selectively just root for Iowa, I suppose.
Right.
All right, Carrie, let's talk about the environmental side of this because your group looks at all kinds of stuff, right? You don't just look at wind. Where does this fit in the big picture?
Right, so wind energy is something, like Jeff was saying, that Iowa has had a track record of success in. It's a clean energy source. It's the best alternative we have for generating the electricity we need to, supply people's devices, increasing electricity demand. And obviously, it's a source that does not have any carbon pollution. It has a really low environmental footprint, and it, at the same time, it offers amazing economic development opportunities to rural Iowa. So we're strongly supportive of wind energy. We would like to see it grow and expand the way Jeff mentioned in the state of Iowa. Doubling the wind capacity by 2030 is what we would like to see in the state to try to achieve a eventually 100% renewable portfolio in Iowa.
Dan, you and I were just together last week in front of a lot of community college students from across our state on a very typical Iowa wintry, snow-filled, with a lot of wind day, I might add. Since you have such a direct day-to-day role with so many students and are surrounded by them, can you talk about the way they look at this when it comes to climate change? You start looking at the polls, especially demographically, and it's really that younger subset in our population, especially focused on climate change, right? How do they view where wind fits into the future?
Well, the first thing they come at it with is, regardless of their age, too, by the way, we have a pretty wide spectrum of age. We have a pretty good mix of non-traditional students. So the average age of our wind tech student would be about 23 to 24 years old. So these are people that come from all walks of life, and they all have in mind, obviously doing something good for the environment, but they also understand that this is really good for jobs. These are recession-proof jobs. Somebody out there has to maintain a fleet of assets out there, and somebody has to be a steward of that energy resource so we can keep the cost of that down in the out years. When the turbines are new, they're operating under warranty, everything's coasting along pretty well. So from a climate change perspective where the students are concerned, they look at all of the positives. Water use mitigation, zero emission mitigation, and more than anything, being a bridge technology that gets us to the next best idea in energy at the utility scale level. So they come at it from a lot of different perspectives as students, and they all kind of tie things together with that understanding that this is something that's really good. We haven't had an opportunity like this in a long time in America to actually put our ingenuity on something that's going to carry us to that next best idea.
Brian, will you talk about the economic side of this? You know, you look obviously big picture at a lot of things, but especially in certain pockets of our state, the wind energy has meant jobs, development, in some cases redevelopment. How do you look at where that fits in, particularly as you start looking at some of these population centers that don't have a lot of people and that frankly haven't been growing?
Sure, and that's something that we take quite seriously and work on every day at the Economic Development Agency, trying to work strategically, work with our resources, work with our partners to try to support economic growth, but especially in our more rural areas. You do the best you can, but there's no magic wand that can be waved to support the type of job creation. The capital investments that have gone into our rural communities and counties are significant. The list is long and winding in terms of those impacts, but it's been an impressive thing to have those type of stable, well-paying jobs, a clean, locally produced source of energy right there in our state. You know, for years we've had a negative trade imbalance of importing energy into our state. That's money that's leaking out of our state. So, but with wind energy, that we've really been able to keep that money here local, which creates jobs when these wind turbines are being constructed. That's people staying in hotels and putting money back into Main Street. And again, it's consistent, it's stable, and it's really sound for our local, in particular, rural economic development efforts.
Chaz, I think a lot of people probably got to know your name back when you were mayor of Newton in Jasper County at frankly a pretty tough time. And thanks to 60 Minutes piece, you know, that was sort of broadcast to the entire country, right? As your town went through at the beginning, obviously what was quite a devastating blow with Maytag shutting down, taking away thousands of jobs, and an employer that you had so many generations of people where you had, you know, kids knew their parents used to work there, their grandparents used to work there, their aunt, their uncle, everybody, both spouses worked there. Explain how you set out from the get-go. I remember talking to you about this, that you knew there was never going to be that one magic press conference where you said, boom, there are 4,000 jobs moving back to Newton, right, to replace all these Maytag jobs and Whirlpool jobs. Will you lay out a little bit how you set out and why you thought that wind could be one of the opportunities to try to rebuild?
Well, I think it was the state's priority as well. With Senator Grassley, I mean, obviously the production tax credit, he laid it out. Governor Vilsack was in the office at the time, and it was kind of the state's. The state was trying to recruit more wind energy development, whether it be manufacturing or putting wind turbines up in that area. And we aligned our goals with Governor Vilsack's, and then we had empty buildings and idle workforce. And I'll never forget in that meeting with TPI, they promised us 500 jobs in order for the development process to go forward and all that. And today they're at roughly 1,200 jobs. So it was something that is growing, and they build their blades for General Electric. And then came in Trinity Structural Towers, and they build the towers that you put the wind turbines on, and there's roughly 200 jobs there as well. But wind was a big part of our recovery, and it was because those blades can be, and it's now if you go towards Iowa City, you'll see some of those TPI blades on the Alliant and Mid-American towers that are there, because predominantly our stuff was being produced, maybe it went to Canada, or maybe it went to Nebraska, but now you're starting to see our Newton-made towers and turbines on the interstates in Iowa.
Bill, will you talk a little bit about maybe on a smaller scale? You know, we definitely have these pockets across our state where you can drive and look across the countryside and see these things going, right? Can you talk about, maybe from an economic standpoint, and maybe if you can, pinpoint a few of these pockets that we have across our state and what that means?
I remember 20 years ago driving up to the Twin Cities and early evening and seeing for the first time the lights up in Ventura, Iowa, the Cerro Gordo wind farm, and how striking that was. And I thought to myself, And I was an economic developer at the time, thinking, wow, what is this industry doing? How is it? And I learned more about the fact that there were places in the state where wind made sense. And everyone always talked about Northwest Iowa. And Dan, you're at the epicenter of that. I live in Poweshiek County. We now have 297 turbines in our county, and it has transformed our local economy. The jobs that were mentioned, the lease payments that farmers are receiving for those turbines, small business owners downtown whose husbands often are wind technicians who are moving to town, opening businesses in our communities. So it has been transformational, but and it's all driven by where do the winds blow? Where is it elevation-wise or wind-wise where it makes sense? And so whether you're on the I-80 corridor or the I-35 corridor or the Highway 71, if it's windy, it makes sense to do it. And it's really having a transformational effect on these small towns and small town economies.
Jeff, as one of the former state senators here, so where's the government's role in this? Maybe both on state level and on a federal level here in terms of support and what is needed.
Right. So I think what's really cool about Iowa's leadership in wind energy is that there was never really a mandate. So we were one of the first states to do an RPS. I call it a mini RPS. It called for 100 and some megawatts, which today is, peanuts compared to the generation. That spurred then follow on Senator Grassley's leadership to do the production tax credit at the national level, which created some investment incentives. So a lot of this growth has been without mandates. And if you look at the Midwest, that's also true. They're not states that are going to pass sort of large mandates, and yet they're the leaders in the country in renewable energy generation. So going forward, the industry is obviously more mature. We believe in states that are open for business for renewable energy, that you're likely to see wind energy double. The real question is, will it triple and quadruple? Keep in mind the national energy use, wind energy and renewable energy, is still single digits in the overall energy that Americans use. And so we've got a long way to go to achieve the goals that you're hearing about, 100% by 2050, some measure of renewable energy by 2040. We have a lot of work to do going forward. One of the unique things about renewable energy and wind in particular is that it's had bipartisan support. So Senator Grassley has been mentioned, Governor Vilsack, Governor Branstad, Governor Culver, and today, Governor Reynolds is continuing that leadership as the Midwest Governor's Chair, and her number one issue is linking it all together through transmission and the grid. And so that leadership has meant a lot, that it's been bipartisan over the years.
And at this point, what does the industry need you mentioned, as it's starting to get more mature here? How long will it need this government help with it? Can it ever be truly self-sustainable?
So almost all forms of energy are subsidized in some way. Wind energy is prepared to go without subsidies. There was a lot of discussion this year.
Right.
The president actually signed the extension of the wind tax credit. Given his rhetoric around wind, you would not expect that.
I have some of those quotes written down, by the way.
That's
for later.
But it's an indication of the overall support that it has, and I think Iowa's leadership in making sure the president understood the importance of that. Going forward, the American Wind Energy Association represents 1,000 companies around America and the world, really. Some of our companies are international. We do wind. We also do solar, storage, the transmission. So can decision makers see the whole network and how it ties together? Storage is going to be very important. Brian's office here in Iowa is trying to push that innovation and technology forward. So there are a lot of ways, even if it's about climate change, which has some conflict around it, if you're looking at renewable energy, it can actually bridge the gap across those politics and actually bring people together in a bipartisan way.
Brian, will you weigh in on that? Let's talk about storage, because that is storage is one of the challenges, and you have a turbine here. How do you get what you need over here? So where is the technology going on that?
Yeah, it's very exciting to see that, I feel like for the last few years, I kept hearing when I talked to folks in the energy industry that, oh, that's so many years, that's kind of a, that's 10 years, that's 15, that's 20 years away, don't mess with that. And we looked at it and said, no, we have significant wind resources, emerging solar, renewable resources, but they're intermittent. We're going to have to try to tackle this. Other states are already more aggressively looking into this. So we started somewhere in wind, and look how far we've come and how much further we can go in Iowa. But something that we did is we pulled together about a year ago, a diverse group of stakeholders in Iowa and said, let's have the conversation. We don't know where we're taking this, but let's see, what does storage, what does that potential hold? What should we be doing to take action on these type of activities? We've since came out with an action plan to try to drive that message a little further. But I'm also very proud to report we're starting to see some of the very first battery storage projects are happening in Iowa, and they're happening at a different scale. We're seeing that Mid-American and Alliant are doing those tied at substations to try to balance that load on the grid. We have put some supportive financial resources into a couple innovative projects, two of which are down in Fairfield, Iowa, one at Maharishi University and another one at Agri-Industrial Plastics, but basically taking that locally produced renewable energy, pairing that with battery storage, and you're going to see cost savings, again, further maximizing those resources. So it's happening. We hope to, in a few months, we're going to come out with another more distilled economic assessment on what is the potential hold for Iowa, and again, what more could we do? And maybe there's some things legislatively that could take place next session, so we're going to continue to keep pushing that envelope on storage.
All right, let's put you on the spot because these questions are too easy. All right, really break this down to help people understand how much can be generated by these things. Use whatever example you want, but let's say you've got a decent sized property and you got 50 of these things going, right? How much energy are you talking about that this can generate, or a different number, whatever you want to use for an example?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, it varies. I mean, we're seeing some that are, able to handle, on the megawatt scale, the large scale ones at substations. But we've got another pilot project, one of the very first residential battery storage projects at 4 homes. So we're seeing that of that scale where they could do it at an individual home level, and again at an industrial facility, really be able to manage that load. So it really ebbs and flows, but part of what we're doing is we're putting our resources into it to analyze and study that, really try to see, did this technology work the way that we thought it might? Is it economical? What's the payback? How does the different technology work in the Iowa winters? So we're trying to diversely put our money into different buckets and tease those things out. But it's exciting to see that it's coming at different scale, different types of technologies, and different types of partners.
Chaz, you don't work for the Wind Association, you work for the Iowa Utility Association, so you're looking at a bunch of different things here. How does this work between the different energy producing sectors here? And is it a competitive thing where wind's trying to beat solar, which is trying to beat nuclear, which is trying to beat whatever? How does this all?
It's complementary, really. Okay. I mean, you're trying to get away from your carbon, your coal, your nuclear, and go into more renewables, the wind and solar. So, and I go back to my telecom days where you couldn't just have all one fiber. You wanted wireless, you wanted fiber, you wanted copper. So you kind of need that in our network. The coal needs to be there right now because we're not 100% renewable yet. But as solar comes on, you're going to see a lot more of our companies doing an industrial scale solar projects to produce on the grid as well. And I think what we're missing when we talk about government stuff, it's not necessarily the government that's driving this, it's our customers that are driving this. When we provide to a John Deere, or we provide to a Facebook, they're wanting to see that the energy we're selling them is renewable. So it meets their sustainable targets as well from their boards, and their investors are wanting us to show, one of those companies to show, hey, how are you taking care of the climate in your organization, sustainable? And because in years past, it needed to be affordable and reliable. Now it needs to be affordable, reliable, sustainable, and renewable, because everybody is expecting that they're getting green energy. And that's what our is, to keep it reliable and affordable, but then also show people that we are bringing renewables onto the grid as a complement to the rest of the stuff that's out there.
So is there any natural tension as there's an emphasis on biofuels and wind?
No, I don't believe there is. Like I said, they're all complementary to one another. We can't power the whole grid with just wind, And when the wind's not blowing, maybe the sun is shining. So you need solar in that mix as well. And then if neither of those happen, you still have to have your on-demand plants to get power to the people that they need to run their businesses.
Bill, do you think what are the biggest challenges, would you say, for these rural areas, which may see a lot of potential with this, but as you well know, sometimes it's a lot easier when you have a larger population base to get some attention, get some resources, get people to see potential. When you're talking about these smaller areas of this state and frankly beyond the borders of this state, what are the challenges to getting those resources and that attention? And then what works? How do you actually make it happen?
I'll say one of the challenges is managing expectations, because again, the siting of these turbines is determined by wind and location and how much access do you have to the grid. And there may be folks who have land who say, I want a turbine. I want that lease payment. Why does, Jack down the street, the gravel road, have 10 turbines on his property and I don't have any? Number one, he may not be windy enough. B, he may not have access to transmission lines to carry that power. So you immediately have haves and have-nots among folks in rural areas who wish they had that revenue stream but can't or don't. And then you have local, politics that come into play. So you have folks that are shaking their fists saying, this isn't fair, why can't I have part of this on my land? That doesn't rule out solar at some point in time, but I think that one of the challenges you have is managing the whole industry. And in a small town, everybody talks, and everybody knows who's getting those lease payments, so they're looking at these turbines. And so it may be that, I don't have a turbine on my land, the guy next door does. He has diversified his revenue stream for his or her business. And that makes me angry. So then I start to listen to some of the rhetoric out there that says, it's going to cause cancer, or the flicker effect, or whatever it is. You start buying into some of the rhetoric that exists, accurate or not, mostly not. And it becomes part of a community that I think that community conversations benefit around these sorts of renewable energy opportunities, whether it's wind, solar, geothermal, whatever. But at the end of the day, the impacts on these communities and counties and tax rolls is so tremendous, it can't be ignored.
And we'll get into some of this rhetoric in a bit here, but so how do you advise these local leaders to deal with this pushback that they're going to get? In some cases,
I would recommend that they do an analysis of what is this going to mean for the economy? What is it going to mean for their long-term utility rates? What is the impact of an infusion of renewable energy going to mean for the long-term viability of that community, that county? And I also asked them to look at what are the opportunities for wealth creation. There's folks out in Adair County who have been investing in turbines for 15 years now, enjoying 14% annual returns, keeping that wealth creation from these turbines in their county as opposed to East and West Coast investors. So it has to be a broad-based review of the industry, but I think it also starts with a conversation. Why is it we're doing this? What are the implications? And then the one other thing I'll say is that they have to look out 20 years. What are the property tax benefits over a 20-year period? And what can we do with that so-called windfall that maybe we wouldn't have been able to do previously?
Dan, as you look back home, Iowa Lakes is a regional draw here, right? You're not just getting people who live 2 miles away from campus. So you're talking on a day-to-day basis with some of these kids right out of high school who are looking at careers. You're looking at some second career people looking at new careers. How do you lay out to them where this could fit in a career path?
Well, the first thing they have to understand is that technology is no longer isolated to industries the way it used to be. 20 years ago, everything was very parochial. Now they're dealing with technologies that span different industries. So a turbine tech is not just an electrician, they're not just a mechanic or a specialist. They maintain the entire facility from the tip of the blade all the way to the base bolts. So they have to understand how the computers work, how the network works. The heavy power production, they also have to understand the mechanical system. So really, they have to understand the system as a whole. And that's the way we lay this thing out for our students. In fact, our science requirement actually brings all these things together in energy sustainability in the environment. So they understand not only the technology they're using, but its impact on other industries. So they begin to put pieces together. You know, we talked about storage. You know, that's a big issue. At the utility scale, it's still very experimental because it's really tough to make a megawatt storage battery that's affordable and can actually be operated very well. And out here in the Midwest, we don't have elevations where we can do pump storage, which is very effective. That's your largest battery storage option right there. So as we lay this out and they look at different technologies, they start to think, okay, well, where's the future of wind energy going? Is my strong suit the computers and the programming? Is it the engineering? Is it the construction? And when you think about technologies that are emerging, we talk about different areas in Iowa that may not have the best wind in Iowa. They're viable because of technologies that have only become available within the past 10 to 15 years. We can see the atmosphere in ways that we never could before, and we're starting to employ some of that technology on the turbines themselves so that turbines can actually look ahead of them, but also look at their past operations to become smarter every time they see a certain condition. And then if we school 200 turbines together, it makes the entire site more efficient. So from a student coming in looking at careers, they see that they've got longevity. If they want to go on the technical side and stay there, they can. If they want to go on the engineering side, they can. Even the people side, when you talk about opportunities for advancement and leading these teams that are in the industry. So, I mean, really, it sounds cliche, but the sky is literally the limit for these young folks. This is a buyer's market. And when you talk about the industry having just over 100,000 people supporting wind right now, you know, that's more than coal, nuclear, natural gas combined. By 2050, we almost have to triple that number if we're going to meet our national goals.
Technology, by its very nature, is ever-changing, right? So how do you keep up with this? And that it can also be a scary thing, right? When you're planning your future, because you want to know, all right, I'm going to invest my money and go into school and get ready for this, but 5 years from now, is this job going to be here 10 years, 20 years, what it is? We mentioned what happened with Maytag and Whirlpool and Newton a few years back. So how do you prepare them for that?
Here's the benefit. When we look at the way we train, we don't train the way their grandparents were trained or even the way their parents were trained. We train them to have transferability and portability between these industries. They have a skill. If they graduate as a wind tech, they have a skill everyone needs. If they graduate as an engineering technologist, they have a skill everybody needs. So what we're talking about is giving them the versatility that industry demands. If they want to go into manufacturing after climbing for a while, they can do that. If they want to go into a totally unrelated industry that may emerge as a result of the technology that's coming into use in wind, they can do that as well. So they can follow the technology. They've got the legs to do that. More importantly, it points them to what that next degree might look like. So when we talk about investment for a college student, there is almost zero investment to come in and come through a program like ours because they have an internship, and in most cases, a 10-week internship pays for both years of college. And that's something where when a student walks out and makes 80 grand out to work in an industry that's still emerging, that's an opportunity we haven't had in a long time, and it gives these young kids a lot of confidence. And the career changers know they can apply degrees that they may have earned for another industry to the wind industry itself.
Start to finish, how long does it take you to get, if you can go to school full-time?
If you're going to school full-time and you want the associate program, that's a 2-year program. We have a diploma option that's good for people that already have an industrial technical skill but need the familiarization with wind because they want to get their families back into a stable situation after school. So it's very short-term, drop in the bucket in terms of finances, but the return for those students is a life of opportunity.
All right, Carrie, we've had a couple of these things bring up, so let's start to get into the hard part of this. Let's talk about some of the things the president said about this industry, okay? I'm going to read you a quote here. Talking about the wind area, if you will, in a community. Of course, it's like a graveyard for birds. If you love birds, you never want to walk under a windmill because it's a very sad, sad sight. It's like a cemetery. We put a little statue for the poor birds. It's true. You know, in California, if you shoot a bald eagle, they put you in jail for 5 years, and yet the windmills, they wipe them all out. It's true. They wipe them out. It's terrible. You wiping out birds everywhere, this industry?
I think we're looking at a little bit of exaggeration with some of those comments. And I think that, you know, when we're thinking about environmental impact, we always need to think about what is the best course forward here. And So if we think about the overall ecological impacts that we're facing with climate change and species extinction, impacts on birds from coal generation, frankly, far outnumber the kinds of impacts we see from wind turbines. Companies that put up turbines also have to do mitigation for impacts to species, and so there are technologies that are increasingly used that help with that as well. And so, certainly that's something that folks like to point to as sort of catastrophizing wind. We need to look at what's the alternative here. The impacts compared to so many other things that we see are small, and especially when you start thinking about species impacts from climate change, we need to really use some practical thinking about what's the best course forward.
And as you start looking into this, when you're talking about birds and bats and such, you start looking at airplanes kill them, cell phone towers, radio towers, all those kind of things, skyscrapers.
Fluffy the household cat.
And there are different estimates here. We're talking probably more than 100,000 a year, regardless. But there have been also some technological advances and some studies into this. I don't know if anybody can jump in on this, but to where there's some ideas about how to minimize that. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Sure. So some of the technology that you can use, especially if you're living in an area where there might be a species you have to watch out for. First of all, you've got your environmental impact study. We already know what the flora and fauna are doing without turbines in those regions. So we study the impact of what's happening when the turbines are there. So a lot of the bigger sites, especially where you have maybe raptors or other species we're concerned about, have a resident full-time biologist that's out there just looking at the wildlife to see what's the impact that we're having. So we can develop on-the-fly mitigation strategy, which might involve, well, I've got a certain time of year where I know in the evening hours or in the middle of the night, I've got a certain species that migrates through. Okay, let's shut the towers down. With some of the advanced technologies we're talking about, you could actually have the turbine, which is nothing more than a giant robot, mitigate itself. So if you do have a raptor that comes nearby, sensing can tell you, okay, let's shut this turbine down. When all's clear, we can go ahead and start that turbine back up. So I think you're going to see an evolution. One thing that's a hallmark of the wind industry is that companies love to be great partners because they know that without American landowners that are very close to the energy that's being produced, we don't have an industry. And that's true in Iowa. Without the landowner, you don't have a wind energy industry. So you have to be a good steward, you have to be a good partner. This also goes into those conversations that you have to have with people before the turbines are even installed to help dispel some of the mythology, some of the rhetoric, and some of the sensational language that's out there. I don't see anybody trying to regulate the household cat, which is your #1 bird killer, by the way, and the feral cats that exist out here in rural areas. Let's start talking reality. Let's reel things back in. Let's have a conversation where we can sit down around the table, because regardless of your stripe, this is good. This is that energy source that, by God, does everything we want it to do. It doesn't have emissions, it creates lots of jobs, and it gets us to that next best idea down the road in the future. So in my eyes, I think the real opportunity is below the utility scale level, where you can really achieve some independence in rural Iowa and other places like it, to actually have microgrids in places where we can actually take some towns and cities and produce their electricity, get some revenue from it to upgrade their sewage systems, their infrastructure, but also allow those energy companies at the utility scale level to send that to the load centers where it's needed the most. And I think that's really the future where wind is concerned, is the wind solar and wind solar battery combinations that exist below that utility scale level can take advantage of a lot of the technology that's being experimented with right now.
Brian, you've followed some of these local conversations where Iowa has now had a couple of communities that have pushed for moratoriums right now to even put any more of these up. What does that do for this overall discussion, and how does the industry work its way through this?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're paying attention to, and something that we've always done. Whatever type of energy policy, whatever type of initiative we're doing, we really do try to take it serious about getting out there and talking to folks, not just having folks come to urban Des Moines, Iowa City, Ames, that thing, but get out there and talk to those folks and really hear their concerns. And it's things that some of the other panelists have talked about. I think it's often if you can show them, you can talk about the different benefits economically, environmentally, and explain to it, get through some of this rhetoric that's out there, let them know that they're being heard and listened to, and show them some examples of how that is benefiting benefiting them. And again, sometimes I could be out in rural Iowa. We've had some conversations where folks maybe just didn't, they've heard information, but they just needed to hear another perspective. But I could be in my office, somebody who's not in the energy realm, and they too maybe just don't fully understand. They hear things or they see stuff through the media. And then as I'm pouring a cup of coffee, I'm able to talk to them and explain a few things, and I feel like you can change and show them some of the more positive facts. But something we're going to have to keep an eye on. I know it's important that local issues need to be sometimes ironed out locally, but I think as much as we or folks that are around this every day can talk to people and try to give them some facts and show them some real impacts, maybe you can start to advance it forward.
Chaz, will you go back to your former life, both as mayor and economic development there in Jasper County? The nature of so many industries, of course, where you'd have some cycles, ups and downs. So as you lured and helped bring in these wind producing, in one form or another here, companies to town, there have been some cyclical changes that you've all had to deal with, right? Sometimes they're adding, sometimes they're backing off a little bit, going back and forth. How do you, as an elected official at the time, how do you ease concerns, especially in a community like yours that had to go through that huge shock of this massive employer taking off like Maytag did after so many years? And you bring somebody new to town, and then even if it's just minor adjustments here, maybe 8, 10 people or something, how do you make sure people don't go, oh my gosh, this thing isn't going to make it?
It's just conversations with those people in your community. We had them all the time. I know there I believe there were 500 and something happened where they went down to 300 because there was production issues, and they did that. And of course, everybody starts to panic a little bit. But then now they're at 1,200, and I'm sure there'll be other times, and it's based on their contracts they get with who's building the turbines at the time. But for the most part, it's been a very steady, and a matter of fact, now they don't have enough people. They still don't have enough people at 1,200. They need more just to produce the blades. And
because it's such a specific skill set?
It is. I liken it. The blades are like making a boat. It's a fiberglass product. You can't take people that put washers and dryers together, and then this is more of an art form, if you will, on the turbine side. So it is a different skill. But I will say this: what it's done for our community is there are 31 nationalities, 31 flags in TPI's plant. That's who we represent. That's how diverse we have gotten in the 15-year period since Maytag's left. You'd have never thought that 20 years ago. So,
Jeff, since you look on a national scale here, do you see common characteristics? Obviously, we're sitting here in Iowa, so you're going to have a lot of people rooting for Iowa to grow quicker than the rest here. But are there some common denominators that you've seen both in this state and in other states, besides a prevalence of wind, the obvious, but besides that, that allow this to succeed?
Yeah, and I think that's the real lesson of wind in particular, is that regardless of your local culture or your local politics, right, red state, blue state, what we know is that there is a unifying factor around wind energy, and that is local economic development. Many rural areas have experienced the same thing. The Midwest, in general, saw a decline in manufacturing, and wind energy, and now increasingly solar energy, are a Midwest revival in jobs, innovation, and investment. Solar installers is the #1 fastest growing job in America. Guess what's #2? Wind turbine technician. And so this has really fueled an American revival, but in particular because of the resource in the Midwest, regardless of what your politics is for the state, they all want that economic development and that investment. And so I think that's the real lesson. If you just focus on climate change and the conflict around it, you miss a whole bunch of ways in which people are working together. Perfect example, Senator Chris Coons from Delaware and Senator Braun from Indiana, Democrat and Republican, started a climate solutions caucus inside the Senate. And that will be probably the genesis for ways to come up with new federal policies around not just wind energy, but clean energy. And so a part of my job is to talk to people in other states who may have different sort of cultural way of thinking about economic development, or the simple way of red versus blue. And what I like to say is I don't think Republicans in red states get enough credit for the support that they have given to clean energy. Senator Grassley is a perfect example. He calls himself the grandfather of wind, and he's correct. He started the National Production Tax Credit. And conversely, I don't think Democrats realize that when they use rhetoric that doesn't create space for people who may not be as excited about climate change to still support clean energy, they're not doing themselves any favors either. So my experience is there is a ton of space for bipartisan, let's roll up our sleeves and let's create a clean energy economy, regardless of what your state politics are.
So do you find yourself, because of that very nature, do you find yourself when you're with primarily Democratic heavy groups, Republican heavy groups, is the messaging slightly different here in the sense that perhaps the Democrats are a little more receptive to the climate change future aspect of this? I'm going to watch you walk this tightrope here, but and on the Republican side, perhaps it's more energy producing, those kind of things, or how do you walk that?
So ironically, it's getting easier for every piece to matter. If you dig a little deeper into climate change, there are a number of conservative clean energy groups that are now forming. They're here in Iowa, they're around the Midwest, they're in DC. So I think, again, I don't think Republicans are getting enough credit for the work they're actually doing to advocate for clean energy. There isn't a state that I go into right now, of the 11 that I'm responsible for, that there's not a conservative clean energy group that we help work with. In addition to maybe some traditional rural groups like the Farm Bureau, the Association of Counties, this is a network of decision makers who all see benefits in clean energy. They may talk about it a little differently, but the end result is investment and innovation for those communities.
Dan, when you were talking earlier about opportunities, can you drill down a little deeper into, since you've had this experience for years now, is there a particular type of person who succeeds best going through your program? Is it a certain, the way they're wired up here? Is it a certain skill set of a person? You know, Jeff mentioned this is the second fastest growing industry here. So what type of person best connects with this?
Well, the type of person that best connects with it is a person that likes to solve problems. Some like to solve problems through other people, leading teams. Some like to solve problems in the real nitty-gritty. How do I get down to making these things more efficient? How do I understand the systems best so when I see a turbine doing something, I can predict what I should do next? So it runs the full spectrum. And because there are so many industries that support wind energy, you have people that come with even business degrees that say, how can I apply this to the wind turbines? Well, I need to get to know them first. I need to understand the operations. And then once I get that experience, I can be a better financial analyst, for example, in predicting what region of the country is going to give us the cheapest energy on any given day. So you start broadening their horizons gradually. So I think it's really the problem-solving skills. Obviously, if you're pretty decent with your hands and you've tinkered, you don't have to be an A student, you know, but you do have to be willing to take a risk, because that's what our classrooms are about. And it's about getting their ideas on the table. We don't teach you a solution because there are very few single solutions in getting this done right. There are 1,000 ways to do it right. So when students come through, that's what we expose them to. We want them to not fear failure. We set them up into positions where they have to make those decisions and build that confidence themselves. And along the way, if they come in with any kind of problem-solving skill, whether it's a strong math and science background or a strong affinity for working with people and getting the job done, that's when they take off. You know, our job is to help them get there and help them succeed. You know, we talk about opportunities out there in the mixture between how people think about things. You know, this knows no stripe. I've got students that come in because they have a very strong environmental bent and they want to do something good for America's future. I've got some that are great technicians. I've got students that don't want any responsibility, but they like to pay because they can go anywhere in the country they want and hunt and fish and do all those kind of things with their toys that they enjoy doing. That's perfectly fine. We need them all because they all serve a purpose for this industry. It's really about the problem-solving skills and the energy that they bring into that particular sector.
Bill, will you share the secret sauce a little bit in the sense of, since we have a lot of people watching beyond the state's borders here, from what you've seen in rural Iowa where this has worked. How has it worked, and what would your advice be for communities elsewhere who want to try to duplicate something?
I think one of the big factors is the understanding that this is an all of the above approach. That if there is going to be a transition from fossil fuels, from coal, to something better and cleaner, there have to be lots of things that are considered. But also the understanding that there has to be some sort of analysis of the opportunity. You just can't drop a wind farm into an area where there's no wind or where there's no elevation. So it's got to make sense. So if there's somebody in a state that's thinking, oh, I want to create these jobs and this impact, and I want to replace fossil fuels with wind, I'd first hire someone to do a wind analysis. Tom Wind is our kind of go-to person here in Iowa, and that really is his name, Tom Wind. And if you want to hire Tom to do an assessment, that would be great. But there has to be that first opportunity. Secondly, I really think there needs to be a community conversation. Is this a direction we want to go? It's a supervisor's conversation. It's a local elected officials conversation, city councils and mayors. It's a state conversation. If there's broad opposition to this across the board, it's probably not a direction you want to go. I remember driving across I-80 from Des Moines to Council Bluffs with our former Undersecretary of Rural Development. And we passed one of the Mid-Am wind farms. And he said, "This is the ugliest thing I've ever seen." And I said, "Mr. Undersecretary, it's having a tremendous impact on the rural communities we serve." And his response was, "Would you like to look out your back door and see that?" And I said, "I actually think they're pretty beautiful." And he's from South Dakota. He disagreed. But there has to be that conversation. That view shed, the vista that people value, a turbine might be something that's completely foreign to what they see. Others may say this is great, and I understand the overall impact. So the wind has to exist, the resource has to be there, and there has to be at least an understanding and a willingness to have a conversation.
Carrie, speaking of conversations here, 1 week from now, of course, the Iowa caucuses as we sit here today. So we've had more than 24 presidential candidates traveling all over our state over the last 2 years especially. I'm not going to really put you on the spot here, but
Thank you.
why don't you assess each one of their positions on wind? In order. As you look broadly, what are the things that have stuck out to you that you've heard this cycle, perhaps maybe versus those in the past? Are you seeing changes in the way they talk about this?
Yeah, I think that, looking at the campaigns in 2016 versus what we're seeing today, it is like night and day. I mean, one of the first launching points for many of the campaigns was a climate plan. We've had several candidates who made that the central issue of their campaign, which is something that we've never seen before. And I think that almost every single candidate has some kind of climate plan that involves renewable energy. It's not optional anymore. And the types of targets and transitions and conversations are just very different and more advanced. And I think that's a really hopeful sign. And I also just want to give credit to what Jeff said earlier too about we're not just seeing this happen among the Democrats or in blue states. The top 3 states for wind production are Texas, Oklahoma, and Iowa. And you're seeing wind grow in other states that might be seen as more typically conservative. One of the big things that we haven't mentioned today is just the economics and the cost of wind compared to the alternatives. And that's really what's driving the replacement of fossil energy with wind in a lot of places. Is you just look at, well, why would we pay more for energy when we could get it for less? And so the economics of renewables, both wind and solar, are really kind of turning the industry upside down right now. And we're seeing places where there's a good regulatory environment and a good local acceptance of renewables really take advantage of that and seeing it take off regardless of political party.
Brian or Bill, I'm not sure who's best on this, but how do you make the argument to landowners to decide, obviously those who are in agriculture, let's say, they would have to give up a portion of their land to have this turbine go up. So how do you have that conversation, and how do they look at, all right, how much am I losing here of my ground, and what's it going to mean long term? How does that work?
Well, I know that when a farmer is approached by a developer or a utility, they have to weigh that. Now, again, in the big scheme of things, it's probably 2% of their available farmland. These are business owners, and they have to weigh the diversification of their business model. And I've interviewed several farmers who have basically said that their wind turbine leases this year put them in the black. They would have been in the red this year because of tariffs and everything else, weather, but it was the diversification and the guaranteed income that came from the leases that allowed them to stay solvent. I just look at it from a business diversification perspective, which is, you're growing corn, beans, you got hogs, you got cattle, and you got wind. It's just one more piece to the puzzle that makes you a viable, business concern, and you can always say no. You can always say, nope, I don't want buffer strips. I don't want anything that takes away from fence row to fence row, and that's fine. That's a business decision too. I think more and more farmers are trying to figure out ways that they can diversify.
I didn't give you a chance to address this, but you mentioned when you have people talking and disinformation gets spread. But some of those conversations from a few of these local communities where people had brought up potential health concerns, how do you push back at that? Both the president's made this comment about the hum of the blades can cause cancer. There's never been anything that has shown that that's a real thing. But you do have some people who say they don't want to see the flicker off the blades or the red lights or whatever. How do you have that conversation?
I mean, you can give them facts, you can give them science. If they choose not to, listen to the facts or science, there's nothing you can do. But there may be someone who says, you know what, at 5 o'clock at night, when the turbine blade is going, it bounces off the sun when the sun is out, and it drives me crazy. Someone else might say the same thing about a cell phone tower. I don't know how you can get around it other than to present facts, present known science, show them that these scientists have, the right credentials, and then hope that they believe it. But that doesn't always work. But it's at least still, you put out the facts as you know them and hope that rational minds will appreciate that.
And we have the facts. The University of Iowa actually studied this and put out a report last year, sort of a meta-analysis of the health effects, and there are known health effects of wind farms and wind turbine siting beyond simple annoyance. And so Bill's exactly right. And so as an industry, we think it's very important to have evidence, to have logic around why we're trying to be a good steward in the community. And so all of those things come up during the discussions, and we're proud of the fact that wind energy industry in particular has largely had a voluntary relationships with the communities that we place the projects in. And it's because of that openness and transparency around the decision makers and getting them comfortable with what that all means.
Since I've spent so much of my last 2 years talking to presidential candidates, I know we're getting up against it here on the clock. So why don't we do closing statements here, as these debates frequently end. Maybe we'll just work our way down the line, but I'm going to throw a two-parter at you. A, why do you care about this? And where do you see the future of wind going?
Yep. So I care about wind energy and clean energy in general because it's the cheapest, the healthiest, and the safest form of energy on the grid today. In the future, that will be even more so. Today, the wind industry has improved by over 60% its productivity from the early wind turbines and the early technology that we had. And that has resulted in last year wind energy being the cheapest new energy on the grid for Iowans and for Americans. The future's bright. We hope to double to create that kind of percentages that are what people care about in terms of clean energy production. We're not there yet, but the future is very bright, and the only question is, can we still provide that opportunity for Iowans and the American people?
All right, thanks. Carrie?
Well, I work in this area and I care about wind energy because I'm a mom and I care about the future of my son and having a sustainable place to live. And I see increasing integration of wind with solar and storage as more of a virtual power plant model with transmission that can carry those resources to where it's needed as we phase down our fossil resources. And I think that's an achievable model. If we're aggressive over the next several decades, I think we can achieve that.
Thank you. Dan?
I think the first thing is I care about it because I have a very strong connection with the environment. Even as a conservative person by nature, I grew up in a place that still doesn't even have a store, or a gas station, or a post office. So, it's one of those things that's very easy to relate to because it has very few downsides. The other reason and where I think the future is going is that we're going to see integration of new technologies where energy production is concerned, and I think wind is that gateway to that. It's a bridge technology. We know it. We've just scratched the surface of what we need to learn about wind and where we can go in terms of below the utility scale level and also making it a continental solution, because really it is. It's not just a local solution. This impacts the entire continent of North America, which explains why it's such a global market overseas as well. So, you have an opportunity to bring a lot of different thought horsepower together on this thing, and I think that's the future of it being a global industry the way it is.
Brian?
And I really care for a couple of reasons, but first and foremost, I'm a father of two young daughters, and I want them to have as clean air and clean water, and also to have some pride in where they live and know that there's so many folks that are working daily to be a leader in this space. It also is, I'm fortunate to work to have a career that aligns nicely with my personal passions, and also affords me the opportunity to connect and to partner with some really impressive folks and try to match our resources and do what we can. But sky's the limit in terms of where this wind industry could go. It's been, again, one of the most important strategic resources for the state, made such an impact. But I know we're going to continue to, again, align with our partners. Storage, we're going to continue to push that envelope, see where we can help there. Working with Governor Reynolds on this, regional infrastructure. I think that's so important for the now and the go forward. But we continue just to see where we can play a supportive role with partners like we have here on the stage.
Joe?
So why do I care? I think obviously one of the big reasons is I've seen the impact it's had on a community that was in dire need of employment. I've kind of transitioned from this. I've become an energy person because of that, but it's put 1,500 people back to work in our community of Newton. But then also, as I see it now in my role as the utility association with Mid-Am and Alliant, Black Hills, and seeing the people that's putting to work in the field. There was just an ad, Mid-Am took out an ad about somebody that's come back to Iowa to work on a turbine down in Madison County. He was somewhere else in the country, but now he has an opportunity to come back to Iowa. So it's making an impact on people's families, bringing them back home. And then third, wind is zero cost fuel. You're not putting any input into it to create energy. Wind is the source. So I think it's going to do nothing but grow and work with solar as well. So,
Bill?
I care because I think it can be an economic driver for small towns. Not just the jobs, not just the lower energy costs, but also because of the impact it's going to have on rural counties and their property tax bases. And what those counties can do with that new money. Pocahontas County is building schools. Other counties who treat this like a windfall and have a vision for it and start doing really innovative things can transform their communities, and they can do it thanks to wind.
Thanks to all of you. I had notes, you did not, so thanks for taking whatever we threw at you here and sharing your insights into this. Thanks for all of you here. Thanks for all of you wherever you are. And thanks to Politico for bringing this conversation. Thanks for joining us.